over and over how it works. Because truthfully, even after 2 years, I do not understand it fully. I do not have my mind around the flow of the money. I admit to it. I organically know that it's working. I know that there's some problems with it, but I can't truthfully say that I truly understand the flow. And I think that until we get to that point, we're always going to have a segment that is going to complain about the pricing.
Did you consider at all, Mark, other parties paying the charge?
Other parties
like
do
the
pay
fleet
the
owners?
charge.
Right.
Who pays the charge? The rider pays the charge.
Just the merchant is the medallion owner across the board?
But I mean, you know, there's this sort of concept that the rider always is paying the charge. I mean, we can, just because we put it over there or we put it over here, in the end, it's coming out of the rider's pocket. If you want to charge them, you know, 50 cents or $2 for it, or you want to charge them, you know, give a meter raise increase of you know, 14% instead of 12%, they're being charged one way or the other.
Right. And, you know, we did the New York City fare increase leading to this. We factored all those costs into the fare increase, yet unfortunately you could classify it as more of a PR issue in a lot of ways, because they forget, and you have to constantly remind them in the public that if you did it as part of a fare increase and you did factor it in, that is something that the customers really are paying for, even though they're not doing it on a monthly or weekly basis. Okay, great. Mark, Tom? Just to hear about LA.
Well, Mark, now that you're done, it looks like we're out of time and I'm off the hook, so...
No. No, we're going to 5:30, so you're not off the hook.
But if I seem a little dizzy, it's because my head is still spinning from the explanation from Paul. Although it was very thorough, I have to hope that I wasn't the only person in the room that got just a little bit lost in how all these processes work. In Los Angeles, our focus is really on the customer, the consumer. We want them to be able to pay with plastic if that's what they want to do. We actually mandated in our franchise ordinances in the year 2000 that credit card transactions had to be accepted by drivers, and that the transactions had to be tied in electronically with the meter. And in 2003, we passed a rule allowing the driver to demand a minimum $10 transaction for a credit card payment. And we had actually raised that up from $7. Two of our companies, one of them represented here by Mr. Rouse, do not have a minimum at all. But as far as I know, all the other companies stick with the $10 minimum. There is no question that the refusal of credit cards is the single greatest source of complaints that come to my attention and attention of the Department of Transportation. You know, I don't know if there's any easy solution, although I certainly like the idea of systems where the drivers actually never put their hands on the credit card, where you can allow the passenger just to swipe the card and determine the tip and process the transaction themselves, and having that tied in with a meter so that the passenger can see what's on the meter and what it is exactly that they're paying. We have not wandered into the level of regulation where we raise the question as to whether or not the company can charge a processing fee to the drivers. That's just is something that we have not gotten into. We really don't have the level of let's just say, of enthusiasm for protesting the credit card system and processing that we see in San Francisco. But this is still, you know, an ongoing problem. You know, the way that drivers get around credit card processing, the main tactic they use is to just not turn on the meter at all. Now, I know that there's electronic solutions to that, and that's something I want to see our franchise companies get into in the coming months and years. But you know, you turn the meter off, then all of a sudden you're back to cash and carry back in the 1950s or earlier. But unfortunately, with the budget cuts we've had in the city of LA, we're much more limited in the number of investigators we can get out in the field to do test rides and send secret shoppers out. But we do prosecute them from time to time. Any kind of fraud involving a credit card, as to say, an overcharge involves a credit card, and also the processing of our City Ride program, which is for disabled and the elderly. If we catch the driver doing that, we terminate them. Now, I don't know at what point we're supposed to be debating or exactly, but
sounds like everybody's agreeing that there's a problem with the drivers, understanding things really, which sounds more like a PR issue, unless I missed something.
No, what percentage of drivers just flat out refuse? I don't know. I would say a good third to half of them probably gripe when they take a credit card.
We did a secret shopper in New York too, and something like that requires, like anything else, like the refusal operations for going to different parts of the city, constant vigilance, and what really turned the tide was really the economy going south and everybody using cabs and the acceptance going up. I think it was that. The secret shopper thing isn't really necessarily needed in New York right now because everybody's just using it. The drivers are making more money and they know it, and it's a hard issue for them to pick up. I mean, remember when I talk about the politics, Christiane, you mentioned you can't believe that the bus, the bus operators and transit operators are hanging out with the cab drivers. Well, there's something called solidarity in those circles, and we've seen it where the Central Labor Council is now partnered with the Taxi Workers Alliance. I don't know if it's part of a broader agenda to unionize them on a national scale, but the bottom line is that they were undertaking an organizing effort. There's no question about it. They're looking to get members, and what is a better way to do that with people that are coming to this country that are in a certain category where they feel that they're of a certain ethnicity or cultural background where they feel that they're biased, there's bias against them. And they use the GPS piece and the GPS terminology to claim that they're being spied on, that their privacy rights are being violated, as we know. And you have certain groups that are represented within cab drivers where that resonated. We don't want people tracking us, and that was really a political thing. And people would show up at the meetings with "down with GPS" signs, no GPS. I mean, they had the union rat outside our building when I came home from the Atlanta conference, right? I'm sure there are similar issues that Jim has faced as well. And so now, without further ado, let's turn it over to Jim from Philadelphia, who actually ended up implementing it before all of us in a lot of ways.
If I could just make just one last point,
I'm sorry,
and
Tom.
that is that I see a substantial number of drivers that are savvy enough to know that this is the way things are and are going to be, and they accept credit cards willingly, and they realize that on the back end they're getting higher tips and they're doing good business. It's not all negative.
But it also sounds like you may need to get the screens that Verifone and CMT provide, or Taxi Magic, using.
We already have quite a. We already have some.
I mean, I don't understand why we're going to the front seat still. I mean, I know in Chicago they are. There's different. I mean, the problem is that it's an a la carte approach. Not every regulator is taking what New York City and Boston have done. They're kind of just a la carte, just taking bits and pieces because there isn't the mandate in some cities. Right? I mean, Jim?
Yes, most definitely. You had mentioned that we took over regulatory authority in Philadelphia from the PUC, the Pennsylvania PUC, in 2005. Prior to that, we actually had a pretty lengthy 2-year transition period where we worked with the PUC. We were given or appropriated by the legislature initially $2 million to make to make taxi service in Philadelphia more consumer friendly. At that point, we were, of course, checking best practices in other cities and that type of thing, and saw that Dr. Raymundi had offered a seminar in on the West Coast about taxi cab technology. Had all the vendors present. Was basically highlighted all of their systems and what they could do. And then we certainly took that to heart, thought it was a great idea to use the money that we were appropriated for that, rather than such things as painting all taxis the same color, or giving each driver a little prize or something like that. So what we did is we came up with an RFP for taxi cab technology for Philadelphia in October 2004. We thought the only way to go at that time, didn't really consider anything else, was a single vendor solution. We put this RFP out and for automated coordinated dispatch service, because we have dispatch in Philadelphia. And what we thought was we wanted to coordinate all of their efforts, even though they're private businesses and they're separate entities, that as a public transportation service, we should be able to get them to, through this technology system, be able to share when they get a call from a customer that if one of their cabs was not available in the vicinity where the customer wanted the service, they would be able to give that service to the next closest cab, even if they were from a different company. We got the industry to sign on at that time. Well, actually a little bit later on, but the system was also GPS-based, which would allow that, provided navigation assistance for the drivers, a panic button for driver safety, and credit and debit card processing in the rear passenger compartment. And what we did, we signed a contract with Taxitronic. It was the name of it at the time. It's now VTS, Verifone Transportation Systems, in February of 2006. As far as credit card acceptance goes, that was part of the deal, and we negotiated a rate with Amos and his company at the time of 5%. And what was happening in Philadelphia, and I think a lot of other cities at the time, was credit card acceptance was not mandated, and credit cards were going, or credit card transactions were being handled by, I guess some cities call them brokers. Dispatchers in our city were handling this function and charging the drivers 10, 12% per transaction. We got this 5% per transaction deal, and we thought it was absolutely wonderful. We thought everybody would love it. The drivers immediately started acting up. So I know exactly what Christine is talking about. She's just going through it a little bit later, and I'm just surprised that any city still has to go through this after several years. But I guess they don't communicate with each other too much, from city to city. But we had the strikes and all of that type of thing. Things have since settled down quite a bit. Our complaints basically are running lower than they were 2 years ago when I gave this address at the New York IATR convention. And they're a little bit lower, but complaints about credit card acceptance still run about 1/4 to 1/3 of all of our taxi cab complaints. So we're still going through it to a certain extent.
Well, we do have a little bit of time, 10 minutes for some questions. Maybe we have some. Also, not everybody has this problem with drivers too. Apparently, it doesn't seem to exist in Las Vegas, where come on up to the mic. Where they just passed a law, a state law, apparently, that says that it's $3 for every trip, regardless of the amount. I don't know if you heard about that, but I didn't hear of any Vegas protests. I guess they don't protest.
But it's to the